Okay, here we are with tissues, Unit 2C. And tissues are a group of similar cells. So last week we looked at cells and all of the different types of cells and cell organelles. And this week, we're going to look at putting those cells together and getting some sort of tissue type. So we're going to see similar cells performing similar functions, making up a tissue. And again, this is going to be called histology, the study of tissues. One thing that is maybe a new term that we'll see frequently is the matrix. And the matrix is going to be this intercellular material that's technically non-living. It is between, inter means between the cells. So as we see cells and more cells together, in between the cells, there's going to be something called the matrix. Now, not all tissue types have a matrix. So some cells are just kind of stacked or piled on top of one another. So there are four tissue types, and these four tissue types are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. So we're going to look at each one of these tissue types today. And again, throughout this semester, as we get into our first body system or organ system today, the skin or the integumentary system, we'll look at the cells and the tissues of the integumentary. When we look at skeletal on Thursday, when we look at muscle next week, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at cells and then the tissues of those organs and organ systems. So if some of this terminology is a little bit intimidating, a little bit overwhelming, that's natural. Just know that we are going to see it again and again and again throughout this semester and certainly into next semester. So this is again just your introduction and your foundation for understanding the basics of tissue. All right. So again, I think you can, put into your long-term storage bank four things, and these are the four items regarding tissue that you want to start with. Epithelial, probably a new term for most of you. Epi means upon something, so we'll see epithelial tissue involving some sort of lining or a covering. Okay, so epithelial. Connective, you've probably heard the word connective at some point, maybe even the word connective associated with tissue. So we'll take a peek at that a little more depth. There's a matrix involved with connective tissue. So cells in a matrix generally is going to be the defining feature of connective tissue. And then third, we have muscle tissue. And of course, you've all heard the word muscle before. We'll see today there are three different muscle tissue types. We see skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Okay, so in the body, we have some solid organs and hollow organs. Okay, a lot of your tubes or tracts are going to be considered hollow organs, and those are generally going to be comprised of smooth muscle. And then, of course, skeletal muscle has to do with providing movement of the body, and then cardiac dealing, of course, with the heart. Now, lastly, we see what's called nervous tissue. And that, of course, is going to deal with the brain and spinal cord and the nerves or the nervous system. So, all four of these tissue types are distinct in what types of cells make up these tissues. So, that's one thing we'll notice for sure today. And really, again, these all work together. We look at them and analyze them, of course, individually, but in reality, they are linked with each other. And so I'll also be sure to mention those connections. All right. And again, the extracellular matrix. Um, da, da, da. Oh, you're good. Oh no problem. I mentioned to the class again as a quick side note. Yeah, you guys are perfectly. You're right on time whenever you can make it. I totally understand that things can happen that get us from point A to point B, and sometimes point B getting there is a little the the road can be a little windier and more convoluted sometimes, and I totally understand that. So yeah, no worries, guys. If you're ever running late. So only time you're in worried or concerned with really is universal time and God's time. So some man's time sometimes gets us tunnel visioned. So and that can be dangerous. So we want to be open-minded and allow life and circumstances to just be what they are. So anyway, that's your guys' PSA for today. You guys are always on time. Never early, never late. Okay? That's that homeostasis. You might be a little early, you might be a little late, but you're still always in that range you're supposed to be. So anyway, the matrix I mentioned earlier, this is that extracellular, oftentimes called intercellular. Now, inter means between, intra means within. So, extracellular matrix, complex, non-living fluid between cells. And again, we're going to see this is a big deal with connective tissue. Some tissues have a large amount of ECM or extracellular matrix, others have hardly any at all. So we'll see with epithelium, there's hardly any or none, and connective is known for it. So anyhow, there's a diagrammatic illustration of extracellular matrix and some of what may be happening out there. So first off, we do have this phospholipid bilayer. Hopefully this looks familiar from last week. This is a cell membrane or plasma membrane. Again, primarily lipids with some proteins embedded in there. Internally, we have the cytoskeleton with some cytoplasm. This would be what they call intra or inside cellular space or intracellular fluid. And then outside the cell is extracellular fluid or interstitial or intercellular. I know some of the terminology and the directional um, terminology prefixes can be a little bit confusing, especially when they're so similar. You have inter, I-N-T-E-R means between. So whenever you see inter, it means between. So intercellular means between cells, whereas intra, I-N-T-R-A, means inside of something. So intracellular would be inside the cells. Okay, so that's the difference there. And then you also have infra, which is similar to both of those, and that means below, something like inferior. So intra, and infra. So knowing the difference between those three prefixes will be beneficial for you, certainly moving forward. And then, of course, exo, exit, extra just means outside of. So extracellular means outside of the cell. Intracellular means inside the cell. So those are the differences when it comes to space, fluid compartments, and certainly matrices. So this ECM or extracellular matrix is going to be comprised of fluid primarily. So, and that fluid is primarily water, of course. They do call this extracellular fluid or interstitial fluid or intercellular fluid. So anyway, just know that ECF is probably the most common extracellular fluid usage or terms that we see. But just know, the thing about anatomy and physiology and science in general, there are usually multiple terms for the same thing because a lot of this is Latin and Greek based. So they'll give you sometimes a Latin term and a Greek term, and they're interchangeable. So anyhow, we do see other items out here. Of course, collagen fibers or protein. We see some, just generally speaking, lots of structural features outside of the cell. Okay, so that extracellular matrix again Again, components of ECM, that's this extracellular matrix. Water, that's probably would say is the primary component. And then, of course, we're going to have proteins. We saw those structural proteins. And the two most common structural proteins in the body are collagen and elastin. Collagen provides strength and durability. Elastin provides flexibility, of course. All right. We also saw out there some glycoproteins. Again, glyco meaning sugars, okay? Uh, Carbs specifically, proteins with a few carb attachments. Again, proteins make up structure. Carbs are going to provide those structures with some energy, more than likely. We also saw some hybrid molecules that are carbs attached to a protein backbone called proteoglycans. So again, now we see instead of glycoproteins, we see proteoglycans. This is another situation, and we'll see this throughout the semester. When you have two terms, the second, or one term, a word, uh, a lot of times we can break it down into either prefix, root, suffix, or prefix root or root suffix, or sometimes you have almost like two kind of like root words or a combining form and a root word going together. So that's what we have with both of these. We have glyco and protein. So this has to do with glucose and proteins or carbs. Remember, everything's carbs, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, water. And you'll hear that ad nauseum throughout the semester and next semester in advanced. And if you take pathophysiology in the fall, you'll hear it then too. Everything comes down with regards to homeostasis for the most part, and biochemistry with carbs, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, water. All right. So we've already seen the water, we've already seen the proteins. So now we have some, and we saw fat with the cellular membrane. So now we've got glyco and protein, so sugar and protein. So here, the second term, protein, that's going to be the backbone of the foundation. So typically this is what we'll see throughout. So glyco is less of a player, protein is more of a strength of this combo team here. And over here, we'd see proteo or protein in the front, glyco at the end. This would mean glyco is going to be more abundant towards the stronger member of the team, if you will. So this would be carb based with proteins attached. All right. So let's see. Holding tissues together. Some tissues, extracellular matrix holds tissues together in a single mass. Other times we're going to see what are called desmosomes, tight junctions that are linking cells together. So just as a side note, tissue repair, tissues do have varying capacities for repair. So a lot of this has to do with blood supply because blood is going to be providing a lot of the specialized repair tissues that are necessary. So anyway, some cells don't have the ability to regenerate because of lacking DNA or the nucleus. So anyway, there are varying capacities for cells being able to regenerate and therefore tissues being able to repair. Phagocytic cells do come in and remove. Again, this is where blood is going to be coming. Some of the components of blood are going to be phagocytic, meaning they're going to be cells that come in and eat debris or waste. And then oftentimes then we're going to have cells going through mitosis, then adding more cells and thus having newer tissue. All right. Scar tissue oftentimes remains depending on the depth of the injury. So minor wounds, again, we have a couple of layers. This outer layer, the epithelium, is avascular, no blood supply. Down here, we're going to have a blood supply. So we see the cut breached that blood layer, the connective tissue layer. And so we form a blood clot. And eventually that clot will dissolve and we'll be left with some sort of scar tissue. Okay. And again, fibroblast, whenever we see the term blast, it means builders. And they're usually babies or newer, fresh cells. So fibroblasts are basically baby cells that build fibers. Okay? Builders. Blasts are builders, in essence. Right? We'll see the word class or the kind of root classed with a C. Those are going to be chiselers typically. So blast, build, class, chisel. All right. So let's move into our tissue types. We're going to start with epithelial tissue. We're going to see two different types of epithelium, membranous and glandular. Our focus is going to primarily be on membranous. Okay. Now, first of all, epithelium is going to, and I mentioned this earlier, is a lining or a covering. So, what would the functions of a lining or a covering be? Well, certainly protection, sensory, secretion, absorption, and excretion. So secretion is, well, I'll talk about secretion versus excretion in more detail in a little bit. Um, but in essence, one is providing some sort of grocery. Like a secretion is typically going to lubricate a tube, or it's going to be something that's, in essence, necessary for use in order to get some sort of action to occur. So it's usually going to be some sort of an oil or uh, something like that, like a spritz of something that's going to aid in movement or activity. Whereas and an absorption is going to be taking something into the deeper layers of the tissue, ultimately to be put into the bloodstream. So when usually absorption means the tissue's taking on whatever the medium or whatever it is that it's connecting with. Now, excretion, we typically think of that as getting rid of waste. So, secreting and excreting are very similar in the way that something's being removed or something's leaving the tissue. Okay, so a secretion, though, like I say, is typically something that's necessary for the function, and excretion is typically eliminating something that's no longer necessary or is waste product. Okay, so process of movement, hormonal secretion, mucosal lubrication, hormones, enzymes, saliva. Those are items that get secreted. So a very active process, metabolism of the body. Again, we're going to see this with multiple body systems, the endocrine system coming up in a couple of weeks. Certainly, the cardiovascular system, the digestive system. Uh, these are all going to be pumping out secretions. Excreting is again waste removal. So carbon dioxide, sweat, tears, feces, urine. This is more of a passive process. So the lungs are excreting carbon dioxide, and the skin is excreting sweat that's taking waste products away, etc. So excretions versus secretions. All right, so epithelial, we're going to see. So anyway, let me go back here real quick. So these are again functions of epithelium: protection, sensory, secretion, absorption, excretion. Um, again, limited to no matrix. There's going to be some sort of basement membrane with epithelium. So you can imagine the deepest layer of epithelium is going to contain a basement membrane. This basement membrane is actually going to come into contact with connective tissue. Okay. So the most superficial tissue type is epithelium. And then the next layer just deep to epithelium is going to be connective tissue. Avascular means there's no blood supply. Cells, again, are considered to be close in proximity. Desmosomes and tight junctions are simply connections between cells. And epithelial cells can certainly reproduce. This is a very important, um, again, because a lot of what epithelium does is protecting. So if we do have a need for more protection, or if some of the epithelium has been damaged, we need to be able to repair it. We may need to add more. So reproduction of so mitosis and cell reproduction are important aspects of epithelium. Um, so again, whenever we talk about mitosis and cellular reproduction, it also runs the risk of cancerous cells, or the cells becoming, mutated because of environmental factors and then becoming cancerous. So we do see this with some epithelial tissue, especially, like squamous cell carcinomas or malignant melanomas when it comes to skin cancers. So anyway. Let's see, classifications of epithelial tissue. So, because we do have different coverings and we have different linings, right? Because remember, epithelium is a covering or it's a lining. So, like linings would be anything that's related to a tube in the body. So, the respiratory tract, the digestive tract, the urinary tract. I mean, that at the minimum, there are three major tracts right there. Uh, Reproductive tract. So, so anyway, a lot of different tracts, and those tracts contain tubes, and these tubes are going to be lined with epithelium. Okay. And then your body is covered with skin, specifically the type of covering of your skin is called epithelium. And even more specifically, that we'll see later today, it's called epidermis. So, anyway, uh, epithelial tissue. We do have four types well, we actually have multiple types of epithelium. It's classified based on the shape of the cells and then the number of layers of cells. So that's what we're going to see on the next slide. So cell shape, squamous are going to be flat. Cuboidal are going to be cubes. Columnar are going to be columns. Pseudostratified columnar are going to be sort of like columns and sort of like multiple columns. So we'll talk about that later, but just know these first three shapes: squamous, flat; cuboidal, cube; columnar, column. So they go in order of really kind of the thickness of the cell. Okay. I'm going to come back to that. Actually, we'll stay here. So that's cell shape. So the other classification that we use, a descriptor, is called simple versus stratified. Again, how many layers of the cell? So what does the cell look like, and then how many layers is it? And it doesn't get that specific other than it's either one layer or more than one layer. So we put simple as the modifier of any of the cell shapes. So simple squamous, simple cubed, simple columns. Okay, so simple squamous would be one layer of flat cells. So simple, one layer, squamous, flat. So one layer flat cells, simple squamous. So going back to functions of epithelium, one of those functions is protection. Simple squamous is definitely not going to be used for protection. So it's too thin. So we would oftentimes see simple squamous in a situation where we would need some sort of rapid diffusion of a substance. So the alveoli, for instance, we'll see the air sacs of the lungs are going to have one simple layer. We need oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. Again, I'm throwing a lot of terminology at you today and last week and probably the week before. Um, it's not going to change. We're going to see a lot of terminology moving forward as well. So I know it can be intimidating. That's why I give you those checklists to look at and to check off as well. Um, but we also go through these. Like I said, we start every organ system out by discussing cell type and tissue type. So if this does get overwhelming, if the terminology is too much today, or just take it, you know, take in what's comfortable and for you. If you start getting anxious or it gets too much, just, it's okay. It's understandable. Um, but again, this is a kind of it's a journey. It's a kind of a safari, if you will. It's an expedition. It's all kinds of traveling through the body. So it doesn't start today. It doesn't end today. It started a few weeks ago for most of us, and it's going to continue for a long, long time. So anyway, simple squamous, one flat group of cells. Now, where would I find them? Again, we'll mention that along the way. Simple cuboidal, one flat layer of cubes. Simple columnar, one layer of column shape. So one, one, one. And you can see these blue kind of circles going on. That's supposed to represent the nucleus. So it's showing us that these are cells. Okay, so again, just in case you're wondering, I know a lot of you are visual learners, so this could also be a little overwhelming because of all the colors and terms and everything else. So again, it's just showing us the shapes and then how many layers those shapes could be. One, okay, is simple. Um, I also wanted to show you at the basement of the bot. So this would be the superficial aspect up here, okay, the superficial aspect. Now, down here along the bottom, the deep aspect, that's going to be where we find that basement membrane. And over here, it's labeled basement membrane. But yeah, you can see that basement membrane kind of throughout. Okay. So anyway, then this would be connective tissue. We haven't gotten there yet, but down here, this kind of brownish stuff. All right, so simple one layer. Now down here we do have simple, but this is what they call pseudo stratified. So right away, the term is kind of long, it's kind of weird, but we could break it down. We do see pseudo. Again, the P is silent. Pseudo means kind of like fake or appears to be but isn't. That's what pseudo means. And then stratified has to do with multiple layers, which is this over here. So pseudo stratified appears to be multi-layered. Okay, appears to be multi-layered. So it does fall under the simple category because it is one layer. It just appears to be more than one. So that's where they get the word pseudo-stratified. And then the cell shapes are columns. Okay, the cell shapes are columns. You can see they're not perfect columns like the simple columnar. They're pseudo-stratified columnar because they appear to be stratified columns, but they're really single layers of columns, just kind of oddball shapes. Again, we see that basement membrane and then the connective tissue. And then this right here, again, is going to be what they call the surface. Um, Now, pseudostratified columnar is oftentimes lined with cilia. Cilia, again, are small, kind of brush-like, finger-like projections. We also see what are called goblet cells. Okay, the goblet cells, they secrete a mucus to kind of lubricate the lining of the tube. All right. Now, lastly, we have if we don't have simple one layer, we can have what's called stratified, more than one layer. This will maybe be better for protection. So, like the epidermis of the skin, that might be something where we would see thicker, more layers. Okay, stratified. So stratified squamous would be many layers of flat cells. Stratified cuboidal would be many layers of cube cells. We don't really find stratified columnar. Okay? We don't really have that. We have pseudo-stratified columnar. Then lastly, we do see something called transitional epithelium. I've seen this mentioned on Hesse exams. Um, Transitional epithelium means that the thickness changes. So we oftentimes see this with the bladder. Okay, so the urinary bladder, when it's full, is going to be thin. When it's empty, it's going to be thick. So transitional relates to the thickness of the tissue changing. So again, usually we'd see this with the urinary bladder. All right. So these next few slides just give you some of the black and white details. I'm not going to stay on these. You can read through those. Again, stratified columnar is rare. We don't really see that. Transitional, like I said, typically we find that with the urinary bladder. Okay, so again, simple squamous, simple cuboidal. Simple cuboidal, we oftentimes relate to glands and ducts. So you'd probably want to remember that with simple cuboidal. Simple squamous, one flat layer, as I said earlier, is permeability is the deal. We want to be able to rapidly diffuse something. So simple cuboidal is going to relate to glands typically. So here is simple squamous. Again, the cells are very flat. When we look at, so we're going to be looking at our activity, or as we look at our Unit 1 lab activity worksheet packet. Toward the end of that packet, there are several tissue identification slides. So, a couple of things real quick. When we look at slides, we see the dye is almost always going to be kind of related to like a purpley color. So, some varying degrees of purple. So, it could be bluish, it could be violet, but for the most part, it's going to be somewhere in there. Maybe some reds and pinks, as you can see. But those aspects of the color spectrum. So, like your pinks, your violets, your blues, your reds. That's what we see most of the time with the stains that we use for microscopy. Now, one of the key things we look for first is going to be the presence of nuclei. So, nuclei they take the stain purple pretty well. So, when we see lots of purple, especially when it's kind of circular, that's going to be an indicator of a nucleus. Most cells of the body uh, have one are uninucleated or mononucleated. They have one nucleus. So typically, if there's a nucleus, this is going to indicate that this is one cell. Here's another nucleus. This is another cell. And here's another nucleus, another cell, and so on. So sometimes, though, like what we're going to see here is the nucleus is contained there, but the surrounding tissue or the surrounding aspects of the cell are going to be varying sizes and shapes. So these look very flat. You don't really see much in the way of cytoplasm. Whereas up here, these look like there's some cytoplasm. The nucleus is circular. There's some, like I say, cytoplasm. It can make it a little puffier. So these are probably like cuboidal type cells. Whereas these look more flat here. So these would be more like squamous cells. Real flat cells. Yeah. And it's one layer. So that's why it says simple squamous epithelium. And again, we oftentimes find that with the alveoli of the lungs. This is a nice image of simple cuboidal. Again, you can see, first of all, I identified the basement membrane. It's this dark line. Okay, but we also see the nuclei of each cell. And then these are connected with some sort of tight junctions or desmosomes. Probably a tight junction there. Okay, keeping these together. And again, we can see this is the surface. So this would be the superficial aspect of the cell. And then down here, the basement membrane is going to be the deeper aspect. This is a series of small tubes, usually, so this would be simple, it's one layer. and then cuboidal, because you can see the cells are not flattened, but they're also not columns, so they look a little more cube-like. And so these are going to be cross sections of some sort of small tube. And these tubes could be part of like glandular, they could, be coming up from or away from a gland. I also wanted to mention this kind of white space inside of the tube. That's called the lumen, Lumen. So I have that down here, lumen of the tubule. So you want to remember that as well. Okay. Okay, simple columnar, pseudostratified, I already mentioned that. Okay, I mentioned the goblet cells too. Okay, goblet cells secrete some sort of mucus typically. So again, you can see these dark purple stained nuclei, kind of rounded or oval. You can kind of see the difference between each cell. There's some markings distinguishing one cell from its neighboring cell. And again, these are columnar. And the goblet cells are going to secrete mucus and spritz it out into this area. And again, oftentimes we'll see cilia on the surface. Oh, here's it. Here we go. These are spritzing. You can even see them spritzing right here. Okay, so this is the lumen. And all of this, it's hard to tell, but these are probably cilia right here. These are little finger-like projections. Hmm. It's hard to tell with this one. So it almost looks like this almost looks like the basement membrane. But like I say, I have a feeling like what this is trying to show is these goblet cells secreting their mucus out into this tube here. And then all the cells are anchored. And then this looks like kind of like adipose, or you can see it's kind of rounded white cells. So we'll see adipose later. Here's another good image of pseudostratified. So you have these columns, goblet cells secreting the mucus, and then the cilia. So this would be the lumen out here, basement membrane down here, and some connective tissue down here. And so again, epithelium, connective tissue. Right, stratified. Okay, this one's similar to what you have on your worksheet packet. Keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So again, stratified, many layers, squamous, flat. So what we'd see oftentimes is a lot of nuclei kind of jam-packed on top of one another. Keratinized means hardened. So we do see this out here is going to be keratinized or hardened. Okay, so this is probably the skin. Okay. Some stratified squamous epithelium does not keratinize. Right? So it's just called non-keratinized. So let's see that. Pardon me. Vaginal canal, mouth, and esophagus are going to be non-keratinized. Cervix, non-keratinized. When the physician does a pap smear, this is what they're checking to see if these have become keratinized. They should not be. If they're becoming keratinized like this, that could be an indicator of some sort of precancerous issues. So we definitely want to make sure that gets checked out. Transitional epithelium, again, preventative cancer treatment, early detection, human papilloma. This is really one of the first linkages of viral infections leading to cancerous cells was human papillomavirus. So HPV can lead to hyperkeratinization of the mucus cells of the vaginal canal, including the cervix. So, HPV vaccines were encouraged to hopefully prevent keratinization of the cervical tissue, because then that is what leads to cervical cancers. Okay, so anyway, that's where we see keratinized, non-keratinized. Transitional again is thick and thin, change up. So when the balloon is full, the layers are thinner. When the balloon is empty, the layers are thicker. And again, we see that with bladder oftentimes. Okay, glandular epithelium. Okay, glandular epithelium is specialized for secretions. And again, these glands are going to be secreting mucus. They're going to be secreting, it could be earwax, it could be tears, it could be, those are exocrines. So if the gland is secreting its substance into a duct, that's called an exocrine. So all of those secretions I mentioned, sweat, oil, earwax, saliva. These are all digestive enzymes. These are all, which saliva is kind of part of that. These are all exocrine. So they're going to be lined, the ducts are going to be lined with usually cuboidal epithelium. Then we have what are called endocrine glands, which don't have ducts, and they're going to discharge their secretions directly into the bloodstream. So these are going to, or interstitial fluid, these are going to be your hormones. Okay? So these are going to be hormones. So again, the difference between endocrine and exocrine, this is important to know, and I'll be mentioning it again throughout the semester. But endocrine secretes its substance directly into the bloodstream, typically. Exocrine is going to excrete something into some sort of duct. So it's going to go somewhere else. Usually it's going to leave the area and go either into the tube that's connected to the area, or it's going to go to the lining or I mean, go out onto the covering. And you should remember, epithelium is a lining or a covering. So if we have a duct spritzing something, that spritz is going to go onto the lining or onto the covering typically. Whereas endocrine is going to go into the bloodstream. And blood we'll see is a different type of tissue in and of itself. So exocrine glands. I'm not going to bog you down with this section. We have bigger fish to fry. If you can remember exocrine and endocrine differences, that's important. We do have different types of exocrine glands. I did want to mention that. Okay. Apocrine. Okay, these are types of exocrine. Apocrine are usually top of the head, armpits, groin, those areas. Okay. Holocrine and myocrine. Holocrine are usually going to be your oil glands. And once the secretion leaves, the gland ruptures and the cell dies. Okay. Myocrine are the most numerous. These are going to be your sweat glands, and they don't really cause any issues. These are sweat glands of the rest of the body. So, top of the head and armpits are usually going to be apocrine. Yeah. Myocrine are going to be everywhere else. Okay, so apocrine, you have this little, here's the cell. You got the apex of the cell pinches off the substance. Okay. Holocrine, just the cell itself dies, and as it dies, it releases its substance. Myocrine are just constantly releasing items. Yes. All right. Again, those are more side notes than anything. It's really important to know endocrine versus exocrine right now. Okay, so that's it for epithelium. We got through it. So let's look at connective tissue. General functions of connective tissue, just by the name, we could figure out it's there to connect. Definitely provides support. Connective tissue is going to be found between epithelium and muscle, and we study them in that order as well. All right, so again, extracellular matrix, that's going to be the predominant structure when it comes to connective tissue. So again, a very simple definition of connective tissue: cells in a matrix. Okay, cells in a matrix. We're going to see some four main types of connective tissue. We're going to see, and again, these are mainly classified based on the fibers involved. So, are there any, or how many? How are they arranged? So, that's oftentimes what we see. Fibrous connective tissue. This is your connective tissue proper. This is when we talk about connective tissue, we're typically talking about fibrous connective tissue. So that means fibers are going to be involved. We have what's called loose fibrous. So we're going to have connective tissue strands, which are protein. They're just kind of loosely arranged. There's going to be quite a bit of matrix seen. Um, okay, so the fibers are loose. I'm going to skip these two, go down to dense. So loose and dense are in essence opposites. One has a lot of fibers, dense. One doesn't have very many, loose. Okay, loose versus dense. Dense, when it does have a lot of fibers, we discuss those based on how they're arranged. So if they're scattered all over the place, they're going to be considered irregular dense. If they're parallel arrangement of fibers, so they would be involving like linear, stability or movement. So we'd see these potentially with like tendons or ligaments. Okay, regular, dense, regular. So regular fiber arrangements, parallel fiber arrangements. Okay, adipose is a fat connective tissue cells, and adipose cells generally don't have very much in the way of fibers. So adipose is very easy to identify. It's usually just kind of like marshmallowy white, maybe cream colored globs. Okay, with very limited in the way of fibers. Reticular is going to have fibers immersed, usually with the red blood cells and white blood cells too. So oftentimes blood is going to be a big part of reticular. So we see that with like the spleen, which is a blood reservoir. And again, we'll look at some images of these coming up. And then the other three, so fibrous is your main kind of connective tissue. Then we have three other types: bone, cartilage, and blood. So, bone, again, it's cells in a matrix. It's the definition of connective tissue. So, we do see bone cells inside of a bony matrix. We're going to start skeletal system on Thursday, and then we'll talk more about the skeletal system next week. We'll spend basically all next week on the skeletal system. So I'll talk more about these two things. So I'm not going to talk too much about either of these right now. Just know with bone, we do have a couple different cell types. There are going to be osteoblast, osteoclasts, and osteocytes. So we'll see those next week. But we do see compact bone and cancellous or spongy bone. So we'll see thick, compacted bone cells with limited matrix, and then we'll see spongy bone as well, or cancellous bone. Cartilage, which is our skeleton was cartilage when we were in the womb. So we'll see three different types of cartilage as well coming up: hyaline, fibro, and elastic. Okay, elastic is going to be more flexible. Okay, fibrocartilage has some visible fibers, and these are we see oftentimes with like intervertebral discs. So anyway, we'll look at these three in more detail in a minute. And then blood is considered connective tissue, believe it or not. Okay. All right, so let's take a peek at a couple of these. So, loose fibrous or areolar connective tissue. Intercellular substance is prominent. So, the matrix is prominent. So, we're going to see a lot of collagen and elastic fibers, uh, some ground substance in there. Okay. Different fibroblasts, macrophages, plasma, fat cells, white blood cells. So, a lot of different cells kind of floating around in there in the matrix. Okay, so here's some loose fibrous connective tissue. Hmm, It's right here. This is a capillary, as it says. Okay, more loose, fibrous connective tissue. So you can see again a lot of matrix. And again, the matrix is going to be the negative space. So all this kind of, I don't even know what this color is, kind of like salmon, maybe peach. That area, that's all matrix. And then this is all stuff in the matrix, cells in a matrix. Okay, adipose tissue is mainly fat cells or adipocytes, some fibroblasts, macrophages, mast cells. Again, these are going to be for basically cleaning up debris. Big eaters are macrophages. Food reserves. Okay, so energy storage, that's the main thing for adipose. But we also store vitamins inside of adipose. They're called fat soluble vitamins. So it'd be like A, D, E, and K. Okay, so vitamins, fat, um, potential energy is stored there. Different types of fat, white fat versus brown fat. A brown fat adipocyte is going to have a lot of mitochondria. Okay, next one. So here, I'm going to go back here for a second. So we did loose, adipose. Now we're under reticular and then dense. And again, reticular is oftentimes going to involve quite a bit of blood. So you see some red blood cells, maybe white blood cells. Okay, so spleen, lymph nodes, bone marrow. Bone marrow is where blood cells are produced. So usually it's going to look kind of like this. So all of these kind of pink circles in here, those are red blood cells. They don't have nuclei. Okay. So anyway, these are all red blood cells. And then some of these are white blood cells with nuclei in there. Like here's a white blood cell. Then you have all these little reticular fibers. So this is definitely reticular connective tissue. Then lastly, of the fiber of the connective tissue proper, we have dense fibrous tissue, which is going to have irregular or regular bundles or arrangements. So here's irregularly arranged and then regularly arranged. You can see the more parallel vibe. Okay, tendons and ligaments, those are going to be the couple of the key features of those. Okay, dense, regular connective tissue. Okay, elastic, dense. All right, so anyway, dense, regular, dense, irregular. Next up, for connective tissue, we have bone. And again, we're going to study bone in more detail next week. Okay, but we will see osteocytes in a matrix. The matrix is inorganic compounds, so it's mainly salts. Again, I'm going to kind of zip through some of these because we spend quite a bit of time on the details of bone, cartilage, and blood coming up. Hey, bone tissue, compact bone tissue. Here's the different types of bone tissue. Again, this is kind of like a teaser trailer for next week. So you're going to have compact bone here, spongy bone inside of here. They also call it cancellous bone. Hey, compact bone. Hey. All right, so that's it for bone. Again, I don't. You've got plenty of terms to learn, so just know bone tissue uh, is uh, osteons or bone cells in a matrix. and we'll study this in depth next week. All right, next is cartilage, which we'll also study when we do bones. We'll see this. Chondro is going to be the kind of combining form or root for cartilage. Okay, osteo, bone, chondro, cartilage. Cartilage, by the way, bone has a lot of blood supply. Bones, red blood cells and other blood cells are produced in bone marrow, so there's definitely a lot of blood supply to and from bone cells and bone tissue. Cartilage, on the other hand, does not have a blood supply. It's considered avascular. Okay, no blood supply. So the nutrients are going to come through the matrix of that's going to come from the basement membrane of the bone, okay? Because cartilage and bone are going to be connected to one another. Okay. Cartilage is very difficult to repair internally because it's of its lack of blood supply. Blood supply is going to provide a means of getting nutrients as well as building blocks and building materials for repair of tissue. So, like we saw earlier regarding basic tissue repair, if you don't have a blood supply, you're not going to get any of those fibroblasts. You're not going to get anything to show up to fix the tissue. So, cartilage damage oftentimes is going to involve um, some sort of procedure depending on the degree of severity of damage. All right. All right, so we'll look at the three or three cartilage types. We have hyaline cartilage. Hyaline is going to be real shiny, translucent. This is what our fetal skeleton was made of, hyaline cartilage. This is what is going to show up as blue on the ends of bones. So next week, right, even this Thursday, when we get into the skeletal system, we're going to see hyaline cartilage and we're going to see blue on the end. Not, it's going to be illustrated as blue. It doesn't really look blue. Blue means low oxygen or no oxygen, which means no blood supply. So that's why cartilage is oftentimes represented as being blue, light blue usually. So anyway, the ends of bones, we're going to see hyaline cartilage. Here's what hyaline cartilage has kind of what they call a milk glass appearance. As you can see, some of the cells of the hyaline cartilage, kind of translucent. Fibrocartilage is the most durable of the cartilages. These are going to be your intervertebral discs. Okay, so these provide shock absorption. Fibrocartilage is evident by, again, you have these milk glass cells, but you don't have a lot of them. You don't have a lot of matrix here. You have a lot of fibers. So dense fibers. This tells me this is fibrocartilage. All right, then elastic is going to have a lot of fine elastic fibers, providing strength and flexibility. So it's kind of in between the two appearance wise. So hyaline cartilage is a lot of cells, a lot of matrix, not a lot of fibers. Okay, fibrocartilage is a lot of fibers. Okay, and some, some cartilage cells. Now, elastic fiber is kind of in between. So you're going to see kind of these milk glassy looking cells, kind of iridescent or clear cells, but then you're going to have these kind of thin fibers kind of embedded and intertwined and enmeshed throughout. So again, tons of fibers is fibrocartilage. A medium amount is elastic fiber or elastic cartilage, and barely any is going to be your hyaline cartilage. Eh, Hyaline cartilage, not a lot of fibers, tons of fibers, a medium amount of fibers. All right, so that's cartilage. Lastly, for connective tissue is blood. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this now because we spend at least a week doing blood. We even do blood typing in class. So not on each other. We have uh, synthetic patients, synthetic blood from synthetic patients. Anyway, blood. So again, this is connective tissue, so it has to be cells in a matrix. So that's what we have here. We're going to see the matrix is called plasma. Roughly half or a little over half of your blood is going to be matrix or plasma. The rest is going to be cellular. And most of the cellular portion is going to be red blood cell. So when you look at blood, it's actually liquid and cells, okay? Liquids and solids, cells in a matrix. All right. It's kind of maybe counterintuitive to think of blood as being a tissue because you think of tissue as being something of substance. Well, again, blood is a substance. It's a tissue because by definition, cells in a matrix. So that's what we have. Here's a three different cell types. So this is what blood's going to look like on a slide. Tons of red blood cells, little discs, and again, nuclei are going to stain bluish purple. Well, or pink. So you don't have a lot in the way of that going on with blood because red blood cells don't have a nucleus. And most of the cells of blood are red blood cells. All right. So anyway, red or blood is very easy to identify under a microscope. All right. Functions. Anyway, all right. So next up, so we did epithelium, connective. Now on to the third tissue type, which is muscle. Muscle tissue is either going to be skeletal, smooth, or cardiac. And then we see under each one, if it's skeletal, it's going to be under voluntary control and it's going to have stripes. Smooth has no stripes and you don't control it. So this is going to be mainly all of the tubes in the body. Um, it's basically smooth muscle are the tubes, so your tracts. Cardiac, of course, is going to be the heart, and that's going to be striated, just like skeletal. However, it's involuntary. You don't control the rhythm of the heart necessarily. What do these three look like? And again, we're going to spend a lot of time on each of these when we get to the body systems. But here's what skeletal muscle looks like. Lots of stripes, lots of striations, very parallel, organized arrangements. Smooth, we see a lot of these kind of like ovular nuclei and maybe a little bit of kind of some strands or fibers in there. But yeah, generally speaking, we don't really see much, just these elongated nuclei and elongated cells. A lot of blood too. And then cardiac. So again, you see these elongated nuclei. That's going to be a helpful indicator. And then lastly are the cardiac muscle tissue cells. Again, you see the nuclei here. You can also see quite a bit of striping, I would say. Here's all the striations. You can see some here, stripes, stripes, stripes. And a lot of them in through here. So this is striated. But it's not going to be skeletal because we have these kind of jagged lines in here. Here's another one right here. These are called intercalated discs. So that tells me that I'm looking at heart tissue. Again, I got all these stripes or striations, but notice how they're not as neatly arranged as we see here. Skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle. Again, you have these discs in here. It's going to be less parallel arrangement. Thread-like with many cross striations, branching cells with intercalated, again, elongated narrow cells, one nucleus per cell. Skeletal is multinucleated. Okay, cardiac. All right, so that's that for our first three tissues, and this fourth one's a quick slam dunk. So again, we have epithelium, connective, muscle. And that's the order really from superficial to deep that we find those three tissue types. Epithelium is always the covering or the lining, so it's most superficial. Just deep to the epithelium, connecting the epithelium is connective tissue. And then you have the basement membrane that links epithelium with connective. And then we go further down, and the connective is going to be linking up with muscle tissue. And again, if it's a tube, it's going to be smooth muscle. If it's skeletal, if it's movement, it's going to be skeletal muscle. So if it's the skin, so we have the epidermis, and then the dermis, then the hypodermis, and then we're going to get to skeletal muscle. Okay. So again, muscles the next layer after connective tissue typically. And then kind of embedded in all of it, except for epithelium. Epithelium is, I guess, kind of plugged in with the nervous system. But running through or running through muscle tissue and connective tissue is going to be nervous tissue. Nervous tissue, it provides excitability, conductivity. We find it throughout the body. Hey, it's able to be stimulated or excited. Okay, it's able to conduct electricity, sending signals. Hey, we're going to see two types of cells. And again, I'm not going to focus much on here because in about 3 weeks, we're going to spend a lot of time on the nervous system. So these are just kind of teaser trailers, like I said earlier. The two main cell types of nervous tissue are neurons and neuroglia. Okay, these are the two main tissue types. And the neuron we see has a cell body, and then it's going to have a single axon, and then usually multiple dendrites. And nerve tissue is pretty easy to spot. It looks like kind of like these, kind of like a flattened egg with little branches coming off of it. Usually these long wires. These are almost like wires, basically, that conducting electricity. So you'll see this is going to be an axon right here. And these are all little dendrites that branch out. Okay. So nerves don't go through mitosis, but the other type of cell, this neuroglia does. So a lot of this out here is all neuroglia. So all these blue dots, that's going to be the nerve glue, basically. So this would be Schwann cells and myelin. Eh, neuroglia. So again, neurons don't go through mitosis, so they don't become cancerous. But the glial cells do go through mitosis and can become cancerous. Okay. So when someone has a brain tumor, it's going to be the glial cells typically, not the neurons. All right, so that's tissues. I'm going to do a quick. Yeah, we'll keep going with integumentary, then we'll stop, and then I'm going to go look at the worksheet with you and review these. Um, and I'll stop recording after this little section. Our first system is integumentary, and again, I'm not going to spend a heck of a lot of time on this. There are just a few basics that you need to know. First of all, this is the largest organ of the body. Okay, it's made up of skin and the skin's appendages. And the appendages of the skin would be the hair and the nails. All right. It's a cutaneous membrane with two layers called the epidermis and the dermis. So the epidermis you want to associate with epithelium. And it's going to be, we'll see stratified squamous epithelium. And then the dermis, we'll look at that as well as a type of connective tissue. Okay. We have kind of like a third layer, I suppose, the hypodermis. Yeah. And that's primarily adipose. Yeah, so here's the skin, epidermis, keratinized dermis. It's like dense, irregular, a little maybe bit of areolar. Yeah. So we've got epidermis is the epithelial aspect, and then the dermis, that's where all the blood supply is. Because remember, epidermis is avascular. So we see the dermis with all the blood supply. And of course, the hypodermis as well. It's going to have blood supply because this is adipose, connective tissue. We see sweat glands. We'll see pu pushing up through. Okay, and then we see when we involve hair, we have what are called sebaceous glands or oil glands. That's what these are over here. Okay, so they kind of lubricate the hair follicles. So you have sweat glands, sebaceous glands. Then we have our first muscle, erector pili, which means hair erect. So to get the hairs to stand erect, the erector pili are going to contract, causing the hair to stand on end. Erector pili. Thick skins would be like the palms of the feet, palms of the hand. So they're not going to have this type of thing happening here. They're going to be thick skin. And we also have nerve, supplies a nerve bundle. Okay. Cell types of the epidermis. So again, when we look at our new body, so first body system, so we have to look at the cell types, and we have the epidermis primarily is composed of keratinocytes. Okay, so most of the cells are keratinocytes, and again, once we get to the surface and they've reached their age, usually at about 28 to 35 days old, they're fully keratinized, and then they slough off. Then we have what are called melanocytes, which are the pigment cells of the skin. They're going to absorb ultraviolet light and filter it. And then we have two kind of low number cells, but important nonetheless. We have what are called dendritic cells, also known as Langerhans cells. Okay, and these help with immunity. And then we're going to have what are called Merkel cells, and these are more to do with like sensory and tactile. Okay, so these help with touch. Because again, the epidermis is avascular. There's no nerve, no blood, no anything. It's just cells on top of cells, basically providing us with protection. So keratin cells give us some protection. Melanocytes give us some protection. These dendritic cells help with immunity, so for more protection. And then light touch for the Merkel cells. Again, anything sensory is there to protect you for communication. Okay, tactile means touch. So we see most of the cells in the epidermis here are going to be keratinocytes or corneocytes. And then again, we're going to see a dendritic cell kind of hanging out, helping with immunity, melanocytes, which are going to filter UV or ultraviolet rays, and then tactile epithelial cells, which are connected to nerves. And the nerves are going to be down in the dermis. We do have an epidermis-dermis connection. This is the basement membrane called the DEJ, or the dermo-epidermal junction. Okay, we can name the layers of the epidermis. Okay, so the basement layer is called stratum basale, typically seen as a single layer of columnar cells. Okay, so columnar cells form the stratum basale. And then we have this stratum spinosum, or the spiny layer, okay, which basically help with some of the reproduction and the mitosis that's going on. Kind of regulates mitosis, I suppose. So down here in the basal is where mitosis is happening. And then the cells just keep getting pushed up as new cells are born each day. So 8 to 10 layers of spinosum, and then we have this granular layer, which is going to be, in essence, kind of like the waterproofing layer, 2 to 4 layers. And then in the thick skin, thick skin has an extra layer called the lucidum. That's the clear layer. And so that provides a little extra strength and support. So again, palms of the hands and the bottoms of the feet are going to have lucidum. And then lastly, all epidermis is going to have the corneal layer, which is the most superficial of the skin. And most superficial layer. This is where all the dead skin cells are that have become keratinized. So basically, they're born down here in the basal, and then 28 to 35 days later, they work their way up to the corneum. Yeah, roughly 35 days. You need to worry about this. This is a side note, FYI. Hormones support growth and repair of the epidermis. So again, hormones, growth hormone. Okay, so epidermis cells, 10 to 12% of all cells in the basal enter mitosis each day. So there's this constant entering of mitosis. Eh, And again, that basement membrane called the dermoepidermal junction has a sugar glue, basically, connects the epidermis with the dermis. Right? So that takes us to the dermis, or the connective tissue. This is what they call the true skin, mainly because this is where all the action is regarding blood supply and nerve supply, and waste products, the hair follicles, muscles. All of that's going to be in the dermis. And more nerve, tactile corpuscles, lamellar corpuscles. We have what are called nociceptors for pain. So we'll look at all that when we get to the nervous system. Okay, dermal growth and repair. Again, the epidermis is constantly shedding, so it's going to repair without much effort. Okay. The dermis, though, if it gets damaged, that means the blood is typically involved. So we're going to have this goes back to that earlier tissue repair slide. All right, hypodermis. Again, this is going to be the deepest layer of the skin. This is primarily adipose or the fat layer. Okay, they call it subcutaneous or superficial fascia. Okay, superficial fascia. Fascia, by the way, that's the covering of skeletal muscles. So we'll see that in a couple weeks. So hypodermis, not technically not part of the skin, I guess. It's basically a fatty layer between the skin and the muscles. Okay, so skin color comes from what they call melanocytes. Again, this is physiology, so we don't spend much time on it. Again, you want to know keratin makes up the majority of epidermis. We do have melanin making up small amounts as well. Again, you don't need to worry about any of those because that's physiology, not anatomy. Other pigments of the skin, beta carotene can orange up your skin. Jaundice can cause the skin to get orange. Bile pigments and jaundice, of course, tattoos, cosmetics. Okay, brighter, redder skin, more blood supply. Bluer skin means no blood supply. Okay. Again, what do you need skin for? Primarily protection, barriers against the environment, microorganisms, chemical hazards, mechanical trauma, UV exposure. Okay. There's a little bit of a surface film on the skin. So we're constantly shedding the epithelium or the epidermis. They call that desquamation. Because again, these are squamous cells. They're flat, multi-layered, so simple or stratified, right? So it'd be stratified, squamous. Simple we only really find in the alveoli. But yeah, we have all these stratified squamous skin cells. Yeah, the surface film is amino acids, phospholipids. So this is what's normally on your skin, okay, without sweat, okay, from epithelial elements. Okay. Hey, sebum. So this would be like sebaceous. This would be like oils. Sebum is the oils. So waxes like earwax, oil glands are sebum. Eh. And then certainly from sweat, some of the chemical compositions of sweat, water, ammonia, urea, uric acid, these are nitrogenous wastes from protein synthesis. Because usually if we're going the extra quote unquote mile and sweating, we're definitely using up a lot of protein. So we have more nitrogenous waste in our sweat. And again, sensation, flexibility, excretion, pressure, touch, temperature, pain. Vitamin D, so those adipose cells or fat cells store vitamin D. And so when UV rays make it through the epidermis down into the dermis, we can get vitamin D activated and basically get going on vitamin D production in the liver. So you need UV, you need vitamin D, and you also need calcium. Because ultimately, what this does, why do we need all of this? Well, the next step is it promotes absorption of calcium in the guts. So when I eat calcium, I want it to be absorbed into my body. I don't want to poop it out. I want to absorb it. So in order to get it absorbed, I need to make sure that I have vitamin D. Well, you can see this says cholecalciferol. So there's you see calcium even in that word. All right. So anyway, again, this is physiology. I don't need you to really go anywhere with this. Okay, immunity, homeostasis. Again, more physiology. We talk about heat loss a little bit next semester. Evaporative cooling, it's called. Prevents heat stroke. So basically, most of the heat moves from cold or from where it's hot to where it's cooler. So it's 98.6 in here. It's less than that out here. So air just naturally radiates off the body. And so sometimes though we have to sweat because we have excess heat buildup. And what the sweat does is it goes to the surface of the skin. And then as it evaporates into the outside environment, that evaporative aspect is actually taking heat with it. They call it evaporative cooling. Okay. So anyway, these are all again things that we get into more detail next semester when we talk about physiology. All right, hair, unnecessary nails. I don't think we had to do anything with that either for this semester. So anyway, skin glands, as a side note, again, they're going to be in the dermis. Sebaceous glands secrete sebum. Hey, sweat glands produce sweat. We have different kinds. They have apocrine, sudoriferous. It's a long word. Sudoriferous is the fancy word for sweat, by the way. But anyway, sebaceous and sudoriferous glands or sweat glands. This is keratin, by the way, the continuation of the nail. The nail, you got the cuticle, the lunula, that's the moon part. So sometimes we've had patients that, this whole thing is covered up. It's like they don't even have a lunula. I don't know if that's good or bad. I think they should probably have one. I think it's indicative of the health of the person. Nails should be relatively smooth, not like deep ridges going up and down. That could be indicator of systemic health issues. But anyway, some will look at like capillary refill sometimes, like how fast, if I push on this area, how fast do we get blood to refill? We look at like the appearance, are they clubbed? That could be respiratory issues. So the fingers and the nails sometimes tell us a lot about systemic, like underlying, potential issues. Eccrine, apocrine. Again, we don't need to go through any of this. This is all like extras, I suppose, which I think I mentioned some of these anyway. But the ecrines are the most numerous, and then the apocrine we see generally in the armpits and on top of the head. Sebaceous, these are your oil glands. And sebaceous glands are always connected to hair follicles. So wherever you don't have hair, you won't have sebaceous glands. So palms of feet, bottom, or palms of feet, palms of hands, bottoms of feet. This is a fancy word for earwax. Ceruminous is wax. Skin disorders. This is again FYI. We go through these in physiology as well as pathology. Hmm. Burns, I don't think we do this later as well. Burns are just classified by the layers that they get through. So first degree burns are going to get through the epidermis. Second degree burns get through the epidermis and the dermis. And then third degree burns are going to get through the into the hypodermis. And then fourth degree, we're now all the way through the muscle. This is kind of a cool image, not this part over here, is like, but this over here, you can see epidermis, dermis, fat, muscle, bone. Those are the layers. So next week, or next unit, we get into bone and muscle. So I'm going to stop.